So, hi everyone. Welcome to Salina Media's Connected program featuring topics and issues across Kansas and in Salina. I'm Greg Stevens. Today we have a guest that represents Salina in the Senate in District 24, I believe, Senator Randall Hardy. Welcome, Senator.
Thank you, Greg. I'm glad to be here with you.
Yeah, now Senator Hardy, for those that don't know, worked in construction equipment rental business for 32 years. He was a city commissioner, elected twice for each for 2-year terms, and was elected to the Kansas Senate in 2016. He received a bachelor's degree from Oral Roberts University in psychology and an MBA from KU. So he comes not only as our representative, but well educated on business and other issues. And so let's start out. Well, let me just say that you serve on the Ethics, Election, and Local Government Committee.
That is correct.
Utilities Committee, Judiciary Committee, and the Transportation Committee.
Correct.
What were the issues in those 4 committees that you served on that were significant that might be important to people in Salina?
Well, Greg, the things that might be important to citizens in Salina are not necessarily related to the 4 committees I'm on. I did work on a couple bills that are relevant to the district, but neither one of them got passed. You see, when we adjourned 2 weeks early, most of the bills that we were working on, either in the House or the Senate, was stopped. And it was a very critical time in the legislature where all the bills that were in the Senate were over in the House being debated, and the ones from the House were over in the Senate being debated. So most of the bills had passed one house, one chamber or another. But we did not finish the process of debating the bills in the other chamber, and so we were not able to reach agreement on bills and then send them on to the governor to let her sign them. And 2 of the bills were my own bills, and it's a very frustrating thing for me. One of them was a simple bill for a group called Love Chloe Foundation. It's on Santa Fe. It's a childhood cancer organization, and they wanted a distinctive license plate to help increase their brand identity, and also to give them another source for cash flow in the research and that they're doing with childhood cancer. And that bill passed the Senate, and it was over in the House, and but it never reached the process of being passed by the House. Another bill that I worked on was for the Eisenhower Foundation in Abilene that supports all of the education and programming that the Eisenhower Museum and Library do all year long to promote the presidency and the heritage of President Eisenhower. That bill passed the Senate, and it was sitting in the House as well. So neither one of those bills were able to be passed. And as a result, if we do not go back, and I question whether we'll be able to go back, the date so far is April 27th, and I don't know that we will be able to go back during that time period. We have until May 21st, which is our sine die, which is the official last day of Senate. And if we can return up until that point, but past that date, nothing can happen. And then all the bills that have been passed in this 2-year bill cycle will die. And that means that you can, in a sense, bills never die, because next session, bills could come back in some form or another. But we're having an election in November, and representatives or senators that are sponsoring those bills may or may not come back. And so there's a lot riding on some of the legislation right now that I hope we can have closure on. But at this stage, I can't really predict that with any certainty.
So you're saying that session may be over?
Session may be over. I hate to say that.
How does that impact the budget? I think you passed a budget bill before your adjournment or whatever it was.
We did. The bills that we passed were emergency related bills that we knew that there was going to be a crisis. And the timing was such that we could prepare to a certain degree. So we only passed, I think, 9 bills. Normally in a session, we pass between 80 and 120 bills of the 800 bills that get introduced. And so the ones that we chose to work on, we had a priority, and the priority included just the bills that needed to be passed to help the government and vital organizations like hospitals and nursing homes to continue to practice. And the budget is the only piece of business that we are required to pass. And so that was priority number 1. And so the House and the Senate did pass the budget, which was almost a $20 billion budget, with $8 billion of it being state general funds. And that was signed by the governor. And then another major piece of legislation that we've been working on the last several years was the highway program, and it also got passed. The bills that were passed related, in addition to that, were mostly bills that gave the governor the power to declare an emergency, for the Supreme Court to do virtually the same thing. And some of some funding bills that would help agencies like nursing homes to continue to operate in this difficult time.
What was can you explain a little bit more that second bill? I think you called it the hybrid bill.
Highway bill.
Oh, the highway bill. Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's a 10-year, $10 billion bill. It's pretty much not boilerplate. It's different this year than it was in the last decade. About every decade, the legislature has passed a highway-related bill, starting in the late 80s. And this was the latest iteration of that one. And it's something that I think it's going to become increasingly important with the level of unemployment where it is, and knowing that it's only going to get worse. This bill provides added funding for infrastructure, but includes such things as rail and transit and broadband. And so many different parts of the Kansas economy are going to benefit by the money that is dedicated to this particular bill.
okay, Senator Hardy, given the COVID-19 issue that's cropped up and seems to be increasing in Kansas, do you think the budget is satisfactory toward handling the issues that might result from that? And if you can't go back, how are we going to take care of that?
Right. You know, we knew towards the end, the very end, that we might, that the budget was based on ordinary times, normal times.
Right.
And we do know now that we are not in anything close to normal. My thought is either when we go back, if we were able to go back, or in January when the new legislature is seated, then there will be something called a rescission bill that would look at the budget and revise it so that it fits the revenues that are coming in.
Okay. Do you have any information on how the revenues are doing?
You know, the last report that we got was just down a little bit, down 3%, something like that. But it was for the month of March, and it was pretty much in line with where it should have been. but that estimate did not include the depth of the situation that we're in now. We're going to receive another estimate, and this is the one that we're going to use really to base our budget on, and that is done in April the 20th. And so that's why we're off traditionally for 3 weeks in April, while the Department of Revenue is putting together all these numbers, so that when we go back, we can see the projected revenues and then determine if our budget is in line or not.
So we should know in a couple of weeks more information, kind of the beginning of the impact of the COVID-19 issue.
Exactly. Well, we'll have a pretty good idea at that point. And of course, being only a month or month and a half into this crisis or pandemic, we won't know the full extent of what's going to happen, but we'll have a pretty good idea. And also, I have a feeling that we would be very conservative in terms of our predictions, in terms of the kinds of things that we might be able to think that we might be able to do, and keep those to a bare minimum, at least for the time being.
How has all of this, or how will it impact education going into the fall? Do you have any information relative to that?
Higher
education and secondary, both.
Right. All of that is fuzzy at this stage of the game. The funding's in place for another year of K through 12 education and also for higher ed. But in terms of how that process will play out is a question mark at the moment. I'm hoping that we can go back to school in August and pick up where we left off with higher ed as well. But I can't say that with any degree of certainty.
Do you get any reports on the COVID-19 issue related to Kansas that might be of interest? And then I have a follow-up here in a little bit.
Sure. I get an update every day, and I do include that on my Facebook page. It's Senator Randall Hardy, in terms of the number of positive cases and how they're distributed throughout the state. That's open to anyone. And of course, anyone that would like to do that themselves, they can. They just need to go to KDHE, Kansas Department of Health and Environment, .gov, and they can have access to the same information that I have access to as well. So
I was reading the Salina paper this morning, and it says GOP-led panel overturns church limits.
Right.
A Republican-controlled panel of Kansas legislative leaders on Wednesday voted to overturn an executive order limiting attendance at church gatherings, funerals, igniting a fiery rebuke from Democratic Governor Laura Kelly.
Correct.
Look at that.
Yeah. One of the things that we did prior to adjourning is that we have a committee. It's called the Legislative Coordinating Council, the LCC, that represents the legislature when we are not in session. And one of the things that they are, one of their duties is within, I think it's 72 hours of the time that there's an executive order that's generated, that they convene and have, if they have questions, they can ask, and then they can also reverse executive orders if they choose to. And that's made up of the leadership of the House and the Senate, and a 7-member group, 7 members representing 165. And this particular group determined that the religious freedoms of the citizens of Kansas was not being recognized, and they chose to reverse Governor Kelly's executive order. I think that it was a question in my mind of, is this a religious freedom question or is this a health related question? And I came down on the side of, this has to do with people's health, keeping people healthy. And we know that the spirit of what executive orders that have been passed and that have been generated in the past have to do with the health of and safety of the Kansas people. And that's why we have groups of 10 limited, but that particular executive order exempted churches from that order of that limit of 10. And so now she included that group, and in order to minimize the interaction of people during this time. And that's where they took exception. I like I said, I think it was more of a health question. I was not offended in terms of my ability to worship. My own church, First Presbyterian Church, has been doing online services for, I think, for 3 weeks now, and to me, that's the next best thing to being there.
So does that end it? Are there any other actions that the governor can take, or?
Yes, she is pursuing legal action, seeing what our abilities are in this particular area. Typically, you don't have the LCC and the governor coming at loggerheads, because a lot of these executive orders are done on an emergency basis, and so a lot of times you'll have them in alignment. And I don't know if there's any back and forth before these things are generated either. I would have a feeling that, if you're going to have something that you want to, once you do, you'd at least run it past the committee first, maybe, to see if they have any comments. But I don't know how that process is played out.
Yeah. So there have been quite a few of these executive orders in the last few weeks, more than normal, it seems like. And all states are doing this too, by the way.
Right. Yeah, it's something that is reserved to the governor, and it has to be that way. You have to have someone that can act quickly, and when there's an emergency playing out, and that's exactly what we're having right now. And I think that a lot of the things that she's done make sense. That's the way I look at things. Does this make common sense? And I haven't seen one executive order yet that's sent up a red flag for me.
Okay, so I want to turn to some issues now that were related to some of the bills that may or may not have been passed. But it seems like I recall there was emphasis on sports wagering and maybe a bill, and then athletes can receive compensation if there are like 15 states that adopt the same kind of resolution or bill or what have you.
Yeah, that's one of those bills that's sitting there waiting to be acted on. The Senate had a bill, and the House had its own bill. And the Senate passed its bill, and the House did not have a chance to pass its bill. This may be a lesson on.
Is that the sports wagering one?
The sports wagering, right? Okay. Right, correct. I'm sorry.
The other one was passed, wasn't it, and approved or not?
The sports wagering? You're talking about the athletes.
Yeah.
I cannot. It was. Let's see. I can't remember if that one actually passed the House yet or the Senate. Okay. But when the bill when a bill passes the Senate, and then when another one passes the House, then they have to be resolved if they're not identical by going to something called a conference committee, and then the conference committee will iron out differences and present a conference committee report, then which has to be voted up or down by both the House and the Senate. If the bills are identical, then they can just go on to the governor and for a signature, or letting it be passed without a signature or being vetoed. So
go ahead.
Yeah, that was one. There was another one that another two. We made another shot at Medicaid expansion this year. I've been voting for this thing. I've been supporting it for 3 years now. And this was another time I thought for sure it looked like everything was in place. And we actually had our majority leader was pushing this bill quite strongly. And so I was thinking, wow, we're going to pass this thing right out of the chute. Well, I guess I'm still a little naive after being there for 3 years, now 4 years, that it just didn't happen that way. And then all of a sudden, the Supreme Court decision concerning abortion came up, and then the push for a constitutional amendment regarding abortion, and then that was tied to Medicaid expansion. And I'm going, oh man, and then leadership in the Senate. Senator Wagle made the determination that nothing was going to be, that we were not going to debate Medicaid expansion until we debated the abortion amendment. And so I said, well, it's probably nothing's going to happen now. And really, we were not debating anything. She said, we're not going to debate any bills until the abortion amendment is passed. She did loosen up on that demand, and we started passing a lot of bills on consent calendar to get around that passing, so they wouldn't have to be debated on the floor. They could just go straight to the vote. And she saw the handwriting was on the wall at that point, I think, and then determined, well, we should let some bills be debated. But we didn't really we didn't debate as many bills this session as we normally do because of that bottleneck with those two bills. So and that's another, those bills will both die as well if we don't go back. But that's the way it goes.
So what do you foresee for the future at the legislature?
If I had to guess right now, I'm an optimist, but I'm not feeling confident being able to go back and finish up any legislation before May 21st. That being the case, then June 1st is the filing deadline for the 2020 election, and then all the House and the Senate is up for re-election or election this coming election. And we'll be trying to find ways to communicate with our constituents in the Senate and House districts. Haven't quite figured that one out yet myself, but I'm on the ballot. I filed back in September for a second term. So I feel like I've tried to be a good representative of the district and the Senate, and I get pretty good feedback from people, and I've tried to communicate well with people over this last 4 years, and so that gave me encouragement that maybe I ought to seek another term, and so I decided to do that. And so that being the case, there are a lot of seats that are in play in the Senate and in the House, and I know more about the Senate. And my guess is that the nature of the Senate will be quite a bit different next year than it is this year, which could, and all of the committee chairs could change, and the leadership could change. And I know that Senator Wagle will not be returning, and and there are others that may or may not be successful in the election, and so we could have a totally different complexion of the Senate for next session. And that could determine to a large degree the kinds of legislation that we're able to pass next session that we were not able to pass this session.
And is there any opposition on anybody else filed for your seat in the Republican Party or the Democrat Party?
No one has filed yet. I hear rumblings in the background, but until they sign on the dotted line, it's not a serious rumbling. So I feel like I've been campaigning every day since the day I was sworn in, And because I'm trying every day, I'm trying to do the very best I can for Salina and Saline County, and then the northern part of Dickinson County, which includes Abilene and the other cities there. And I feel like, you know, when I every time I do something, I'm doing it for my district and try to help the district, but I'm also, in a sense, campaigning, because you're out there, you're in the midst of business after hours or parades or legislative forums or meetings. And so I do that as part of the job, but it's also, in a sense, campaigning. So I guess it feels pretty comfortable to me now to do things, including things like this, where ordinarily I'd be terrified. But I've done enough of them so that I feel reasonably comfortable talking to people about issues and talking about things I'm frankly not comfortable about. But they are.
And like you mentioned earlier, campaigning is going to be a little bit different in the next few months. If you can't do meetings of over 10 people,
Mm-hmm.
it'll be online, and
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of campaigning, I suppose. Although this is campaigning today.
Yeah, and I haven't really come to any definite conclusions yet, but I love knocking on doors. That's one thing I felt like was they gave me my focus. It centered me in terms of, well, I know I'm representing the people well because I've talked to 4,000 of them by the time I got there. And so I would love to be able to do that again. And I know that it's going to be problematic, even if I wear gloves and a mask walking up to a door. But what I was thinking about doing is I have access to voter rolls, of course, like every other candidate does. I was thinking about just walking along the curb and then calling a house when I get there and see if people want to chat. And then you could, you know, ask them, would you like a yard sign, that kind of thing. I'll have yard signs, if nothing else. But I like that personal touch if I can do it, if it's just seeing someone through a window. But and of course I'll be doing some digital advertising, and I'll do this whether I have a candidate or any opposition or not, just because I feel like it's important to connect, to keep me grounded in the way the district is.
Well, we've covered a lot of territory here. And is there anything else that you would like to add before we end here today?
I don't know. I would say if anyone has questions, when at the end of the session, and I've already done this, I tell my office assistant, okay, go ahead and forward my office phone to my cell phone. And so anyone that has a question, and they call my office phone, which is 785-296-7369, I answer it. And so I want to stay connected with people. I answer emails. I answer telephone calls. I try to maintain a good contact with the district, and you might find me in Ad Astra at some point once they reopen. I love that sort of thing. It energizes me, and so I'm looking forward to being able to do that at some point.
Well, those are some of the ingredients of a good politician, Senator Hardy. So we appreciate you taking time today to connect with Salina Media Connection and the people that watch our channel. Thank you very much. And we'll have you back again sometime.
Okay. Thanks, Greg. Looking forward to it. Bye-bye.